Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to all the parts of the world. On behalf of, my name is Dr. Lyudmila Smirnova. I'm professor of education at Mount St. Mary College, and I'm co-chair of this conference. On behalf of our planning team, I want to welcome educators from across the globe to share their experiences, challenges, and successes related to educating during the pandemic and beyond. Only 6 months ago, our Sigma Tau chapter, Kappa Delta Pi, International Honor Society in Education, began an informal conversation about educating children, learners during the time of the pandemic with our sister chapter from Italy, the first honor society in education in Italy, and their partners from Costa Rica and Greece. Energized by our conversations, we were inspired to reach out to even more broadly, to hear stories and voices from more diverse places. Our first formal half conference in April was called Pandemic Pedagogy, Lessons of Transformation and Resilience. And it was really interesting we found that educators have a lot to say about the pandemic experience, the challenges it held for them and their students, and how they worked in the many positive challenges and how they dealt with those challenges, and how created a real organic learning. The enthusiastic response echoed in many positive evaluations, and it demanded that we keep this conversation going. And that very day, we began planning for this conference, 3-day conference, Pandemic Pedagogy, Lessons Learned, Moving Forward. I wanted just to warm up everybody for the 3-day conference. I wanted you to think and write 2 or 3 words, or maybe one phrase. What words come to mind when you hear the pandemic pedagogy term or phrase? So this is you can scan this QR code, or you can go to this link and somebody will help me, and Nelly or Lindsay, you can put the link in the chat. So, and let's see what people think when what they feel, what they think, what comes to mind when you hear the word pandemic pedagogy. And let's look. And we are using Answer Garden. Answer Garden. Here you go. Let's see. Let me refresh it. The words come up: challenging, teaching online, discomfort, virtual learning, empathy, chaos, strength, innovative, reclamation, resilience, determination. Let's see more. Well, that's what I think. That's what I thought. The word resilience became the first and the big word that comes to mind for everybody. That's why we chose it for our first conference. Okay, so I think all these things, all these concepts that we see: empathy, reframing, determination, opportunity, virtual, hardships, innovative reclamation, problem solving, well-being, all these things will be in the conversation with us. And so before we begin our conversation, I would like to acknowledge the team that has made this conference happen. My colleague at Mount St. Mary College and collaborator, Dr. Sonia Abby Taylor, who has offered her creative leadership, her wisdom, and tireless energy. My long-term friend and collaborator, international educational technology guru, I call Dr. Nellie Deutsch, veteran of many hundreds of webinars and online conferences and professional development. She brought her expertise into the effort. And our Kappa Delta Pi chapter officers and teacher candidates were instrumental in making this event possible. They spent countless hours of preparing for this event. And I want to particularly acknowledge our president of our chapter, Julia Loda, Vice President Lindsay Beyer, and Nicole Nasso, our social media manager. She will be sharing ideas, sharing links with you so that you would share your experience during this conference on our social media. I now want to turn to Lindsay Beyer to introduce the president of our college, to welcome you to our event, and let's get started. Lindsay?
Thank you, Dr. Shmanova. So I would like to introduce our president of Mount St. Mary, Dr. Jason Adsit. Before coming to Mount St. Mary, Dr. Adsit was the Dean of the School of Arts, Sciences, and Education, and the Director of the Educational Leadership Doctoral Program and the Deweyville College in Buffalo, New York. So Dr. Adsit, please welcome everyone to our conference.
Thanks, Lindsay, and hi. And thanks to the KDP leadership team and to our really talented faculty members here on campus and to all of our international partners for helping pull this together. This is a really big deal and a really big endeavor, so you should all be very, very proud of it. You've pulled together people from all over the globe to talk about something that is still very much at the forefront of our minds. We're still learning so much about how we need to adjust design, instruction, student engagement, and ultimately student learning during the midst of this terrible pandemic. So please, enjoy these fruitful conversations, enjoy the learning that's going to occur, enjoy the sharing that's going to happen. And I would assume you're going to turn over to Dr. Abanza right now, who is far smarter than me, so he'll be much more interesting for all of you to listen to. But thank you all so much.
Thank you. Lindsay?
Thank you, Dr. Adsit. So before we go to Dr. Abanza, I would like to introduce Nicole, and she will introduce you. Nicole?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for
Okay.
Okay.
Nicole, there is a sound problem. Okay, Lindsay, you pick up, Lindsay.
To you, yes. Dr. Abanza.
Lindsay, Nicole, the sound is breaking, so Lindsay will proceed.
We're fighting over you. How do you feel?
That's cool.
So it is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. George Abanza. He is the Vice President of Academic Affairs, and he came to Mount St. Mary in July of 2020. He earned his PhD in philosophy from Florida State University in 2005. And he specializes in philosophy of education, social and political philosophy. He is an accomplished author, a respected speaker, and having presented on various philosophical topics at conferences and workshops, nationally and internationally across the last 3 decades, Dr. Abanza will now provide his thoughts and insights as we begin our journey together. So please, Dr. Abanza.
Thank you, Lindsay. And you know, you said my name beautifully because it's not easy, but we did get it wrong in the spelling on the frame there, but that's okay. It's Abanza. But anyway, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Ludmila and Sonia, for allowing me this opportunity. You asked for it, you're going to get it. I just fair warning, I was allotted up to 20 minutes. I said, I hope I won't need that much. So I'm going to try to do my best to keep it around 10 minutes or so, but I did want to share some thoughts. Obviously, as Lindsay mentioned, I decided to enter a new realm a new institution and new responsibilities in the middle of a pandemic. So, I highly recommend it next time to anyone. It's been quite exciting. So the title of my reflections is Frustration, Pain, and Suffering, Pandemic Fodder for Learning. There's nothing like a pandemic to get us thinking about the return to how normal life used to be for us. Surely freedoms, particularly those associated with movement, social interactions, have been restricted. Though still possible by virtual means, communication has nonetheless been limited and forced us to stretch our capabilities for attention. Worst of all, the loss of life, though not itself an unnatural phenomenon, has been both accelerated and acute. These are not small challenges by any stretch. Nevertheless, would our lives in that normal we so desperately want to regain have been free from frustration, pain, or suffering? Certainly not. The reality is, we have been challenged to adapt to a different set of unique circumstances, which, like the circumstances of the normal, carry with them the same potential for growth and development. In a sense, opportunities for learning. We've certainly come a long way since our days as hunter-gatherers, not to mention the days when we valued even cooking for ourselves. Substitute for my next example, DoorDash or Uber Eats. Zone Chefs, the food service company founded in New York City, offers 3 fully cooked meals delivered each morning to your home. All you have to do, their advertisement urges, is open your door. Also gone are the days when children needed to make a connection between their education and survival. This ought to come as no surprise given the level of affluence we enjoy today in many areas of this country, which allows us the luxury of idleness that makes complacence with lowered expectations easier to bear. And for an additional 30 cents, the digitalized voice operators persuade us that number can be automatically dialed for you. Lost alongside this vulnerability of dependence are the virtues of self, perseverance, self-discipline, self-motivation, and self-reliance. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, one of my favorites, envisioned our natural passion for survival as a necessary impetus for learning, and perhaps even more importantly, the desire to continue learning. Moreover, he believed that threats to our survival summoned within us our first and most basic expressions of freedom and agency. This need to learn in order to survive is our first great teacher of lessons about the process of learning itself, something we must ultimately be motivated to do for ourselves. It is this passion which drives our efforts at doing and understanding for ourselves that is at the heart of Rousseau's pedagogy. We recognize in young Émile's fervor for personal sovereignty a kind of existential striving towards self-actualization that counters those compelling forces of nature that might otherwise stifle life itself. Émile, educated in the interstices of nature's necessities and possibilities, is able to survive within modern civilization precisely because he possesses the moral fortitude and emotional poise that makes him immune to the demands and frivolity of modern life. It is he who, owing to his unique education, withstands the turbulence of life, not to mention the pressures of extravagant consumption and bartering in unreasonable desires, the corn of the realm, so emblematic of modern life. Perhaps the most infamous example of this, and if you've read Émile, this is the walk in the forest that he takes with Rousseau, his tutor. Émile's first lesson in cosmography, one that teaches him not only the practical uses of astronomy, but also the more practical lesson of why he ought to value learning itself. Émile understands this value because he's compelled by his own needs, which on this occasion happen to include hunger and thirst, along with a hint of fear and a touch of homesickness. He is forced to ask those questions he needs answers to for himself in order to find his way home to Montmorency from the forest. In their dealings with the everyday obstacles, frustrations, and challenges before them, children must be allowed the freedom to learn from the consequences of both their successes and failures. Rousseau suggests we allow natural consequences to do their part, make their impact, have their effect, so that we gain the complementary habit of resilience with which to face life's more arduous and painful lessons. Tough lessons to learn and lessons that require toughness to teach are valuable lessons many today all too often run from. by doing everything they can to avoid even the slightest hint of conflict, frustration, or pain. Rousseau warned that parents who spoil their children surreptitiously undermine their autonomy by overriding it, which is tantamount to imposing upon them the severest of restrictions on their freedom to do as they see fit for themselves. Rousseau does not intend the kind of freedom that allows students to develop their own interests in some vulgarly opportunistic sense. Rather, what is meant is simply that students are allowed to freely explore life in order to discover their own needs and interests, ultimately in the service of understanding their own need for an education. They must recognize and find within themselves their own interest in, need, and desire for learning. For Rousseau, nature contains its own regulative and ordering principles. These are reflected in those parameters established by necessity, which circumscribe, among other things, our physical and biological possibilities. Nature sets limits on what we can desire or will, as well as upon our capabilities to realize for ourselves what we desire or will. Given the creature comforts of current civilization, many of our young may no longer find themselves confronted with the ruthlessness of a bygone primitive state. The pandemic was quite the reminder. But what of the pre-pandemic challenges and threats to their survival? Among these, depression, anxiety, obesity, drug addiction, violence, emotional indifference, and ironically, the very nurturance that in attempts to shield them from peril only further threaten their well-being by extending their dependence on others. It is within this context that we may find the redeeming value of Rousseau's insistent attention to individual freedom and initiative, in his exhortation to never relinquish our personal responsibility in the pursuit of happiness. According to John Dewey, little shift here, everything we do in life occurs within a natural web of experience. Within this web, there's a wide range of experiences to be had, from the mundane to the creative. Their qualitative differences seem to lie not only in their degrees of intensity, but also in the levels of deliberative involvement with which we engage in either sort of experience. The more intentional and deliberative the experience, the more we call into action our rational and emotional capabilities, and thus the more meaningful the experience. It should come as no surprise that the great part of experience is typically of the ordinary sort. Fortunately for us, though, experience does not have to remain ordinary. So how does one make ordinary experiences extraordinary? Dewey's understanding of experience is based on his conception of human beings as living organisms who, confronted with varying environmental circumstances, find themselves having to constantly satisfy their needs. Knowledge then arises as a natural outgrowth of our need to control a stable yet precarious and ever-changing environment in order that we may maintain some level of stability, at least for the interim. According to Dewey, this capability for acquiring knowledge functions within the context of so-called problematic situations. Dewey views intelligence as the ability of a living organism in a particular relationship to its environment to maximize its possibilities for attaining particularly desired results. Take a simple example involving our habits. Some of us recall instances when we engaged in routine activities such as driving home from school or work, without being fully aware of the events that transpired along the drive. We arrive in our driveways and realize that we were not paying attention, yet we find ourselves safely at home. Dewey would say this is possible because we possess a certain amount of funded knowledge in the form of memories and habits about objects, events, and behaviors that allows us to act in such a seemingly unreflective manner. Yet, as we continue through our normal processes of living, we find our routines and habits suddenly interrupted by some new problem, situation, challenge, or uncertainty. According to Dewey, such problems, challenges, or uncertainties initiate in us the need for inquiry. Let's shift to a slightly more complex example. Every day we put the same amount of change in the vending machine, and each time we routinely receive our dose of carbonated sugar water and caffeine. But today is different. We do not get the same or usual response from the machine. We find ourselves in a situation that is unresolved, incomplete, indeterminate. The expected result is not realized. According to Dewey, we are now primed for thinking. As we begin our attempts to find a resolution to our problems, to complete the task we had originally set upon, our problematic situation establishes the context for our inquiry. Our first reaction, once we move past determining that we now have a problem, is to formulate hypotheses about possible alternative plans of action. So for instance, we might set upon pressing buttons, shaking the machine, kicking it, putting more money into it, making another selection, or taking the more civil approach of calling the number on the machine so that we might retrieve a refund. Good luck. What is informative here with regard to the nature of experience is that Dewey would have us keep in mind that all of our hypotheses are necessarily derived from the possibilities made present to us by this particular environment, along with the fund of knowledge we already bring to the particular situation. As we continue to search for possible resolution, we might further refine or clarify our hypotheses to better suit the problem at hand. Ultimately, we must do something overtly to bring about the anticipated result and thereby test our hypotheses. It is important to note that until we have actually acted upon our ideas so as to bring about the desired outcome, that is, until we have tested our hypotheses, we have not yet brought our experience to fruition. Once we do so, whether or not we actually get our soda, since resolution of this issue does not necessarily mean we end up with a soda in our hands, our habits have been transformed through an adaptation to circumstances that have been encountered and subsequently resolved. In other words, we have learned. This routine ought to sound familiar because it's no different from the scientific method, which Dewey referred to as the method of intelligent experience. The human living organism, finding itself in a state of equilibrium temporarily, relies on previous habits and knowledge. Suddenly and inevitably, a problem situation or an indeterminate situation arises, whether unexpected or planned, and the equilibrium is disturbed, forming an unstable situation. Incidentally, a critical role for educators is to prepare those in their charge for the unexpected and to deliberately place before them well-planned problem situations. This elicits a response in the organism, which reacts by attempting to apply previous habits. But when these are insufficient for dealing with the new situation, there's an intellectual response that requires a clear definition of the problem. The organism formulates hypotheses, that is, possible courses of action drawn from previous knowledge, habit base. Thinking through the meaning of these hypotheses, analysis, dramatic rehearsal, as Dewey calls it, are applied in experimentation and testing, leading to the application of results and the resolution of the problem, thus completing a new circuit of understanding such that the organism is once again in a temporary state of equilibrium. Dewey puts it in the following way, quote, "To learn from experience is to make a backward and forward connection between what we do to things and what we enjoy or suffer from things in consequence. Under such conditions, doing becomes a trying, an experiment with the world to find out what it is like, and the undergoing becomes instruction. Discovery of the connection of things," end quote. When we pay careful attention to this process and its outcomes, we reshape our previous understanding of similar situations. At the same time, we have, even if ever so minutely, transformed not only our environment, but also in transforming our habits, we have transformed ourselves. According to Dewey, engaging in a process of inquiry by means of which we resolve problem situations somehow changes us, if for no other reason, because it adds to our repertoire of possibilities for future thought and action. In other words, education is about becoming something more than we were prior to facing the problem or adversity. Inquiry empowers us to better deal with our subsequent problems and adversities. Such is the basis for growth and development, that is, for learning. In this vein, the learning experience has much in common with what Dewey calls aesthetic experience. In both, whether as artist or student, we begin with a problematic situation and forecast the consequences of possible alternatives for thinking and acting, and in this case, for artists creating. We do this in our search for a path that will integrate competing desires and through readjustment, restore equilibrium to our incomplete and dislocated experiences. According to Dewey, inquiry itself is, quote, "the controlled or directed transformation of an indeterminate situation into one that is so determinate in its constituent distinctions and relations as to convert the elements of the original situation into a unified whole," end quote. This is as true for the artist as it is for the student. For both, inquiry, in essence, learning, is the process of reorganizing, resolving, and transforming problematic or incomplete situations into unified experiences. Dewey's educational and aesthetic philosophies are thus grounded in an understanding of learning and creation as adaptations and growth of a living organism seeking a biologically based equilibrium within an ever-changing natural or social environment. It is because knowledge is our greatest adaptive tool as intelligent beings, from our most fundamental efforts to ensure our continued survival to our greatest creative feats, that learning and creating take such a prominent place in Dewey's philosophy. So whether engaging in laboratory experiments, introducing brushstrokes to canvas, or navigating the newly established social practices brought on by a pandemic, our circumstances are simultaneously adjusted and unified. New meanings are derived and former ones given new life. Energies are explored and redirected. As Dewey states, quote, all intelligent activities of humankind, no matter whether expressed in science, fine arts, or social relationships, have for their task the conversion of causal bonds, relations of succession, into meanings. An aesthetic sensibility brings our interest, reflection, and emotion into a focused attention upon the very objects and events that provide us the proper conditions for the realization of harmony in our experiences. Interest, reflection, and emotion so honed make way for our ascertaining meaning, equipping us to make better sense of ourselves and our circumstances. Yes, a pandemic of such epic proportions has introduced challenges, difficulties, new sources of tremendous anxiety, pain, and suffering. But for those very reasons, has also presented to us opportunities for continued growth and development. In a word, learning. As I have consistently said to colleagues throughout this time, I believe teachers, as problem solvers, are equipped precisely for the challenges we continue to face, as well as for harnessing these challenges into opportunities for innovation and learning. I wish each of you meaningful learning experiences throughout the conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And look at the screen. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Yep. Thank you, Dr. Abanza. That was informative and interesting and tied back to so many of the things that we think are going to occur during this conference. Very inspiring. So I'm Sonia Abbey Taylor. I'm an associate professor of education here at the Mount. I'm really proud to be working with Dr. Smirnova on this project and many others. She is a motivator and a mobilizer and gets things going and has enabled our chapter to rise in many ways. So I'm also proud to be working with the incredible chapter of students in KDP. Our teacher candidates, whom you'll meet in our concurrent sessions, have worked tirelessly with us to bring this conference to fruition. Now, they may not all be here now, but I counted the number of countries that are represented in the registration. There are 22 different countries who have registered: Azerbaijan, Bangladesh, Canada, China, Costa Rica, Greece, Great Britain, Germany, India, Israel, Italy, Jordan, Lithuania, Myanmar, Palestinian territories, Russia, Poland, Ukraine, South Africa, Sweden, Thailand, and the USA. We expect them all to be here tomorrow. So this is truly an international conference. And at no time in history do the words international or global have more importance or more magnitude than they have today. We are experiencing an international pandemic. Addressing climate change is an international challenge, and creating a sustainable environments is an international challenge. Eradicating poverty is an international responsibility. Education is a path out of poverty. Providing education for all needs to be an international commitment. All of these issues connect to what we think and the actions that we take as educators. We hope that this conference confirms the value of international discourse and creates a space for problem solving, as Dr. Abanza referred to. We hope that you benefit from the content shared by presenters and attendees, and hope you make connections to others that are here today and tomorrow and Sunday, and that you develop and maintain relationships with each other so we can create an international network of educators. As I close my statements, I join Dr. Abanza in quoting Dewey. Understanding one another means that objects, including sounds, have the same value for both with respect to carrying on a common pursuit. We are here today in a common pursuit of the lessons learned and the ways to move forward during the pandemic. So thank you for joining us today. And now I'd like to turn over the screen, I guess, to Nellie Deutsch and Dr. Smirnova to introduce our first or second guest speaker.
Yes, so this is some information about Dr. Nellie Deutsch, our contributor to this conference and helper, and she designed and created video for our conference. And before we introduce our keynote speaker, I would like to, Nicole and Lindsay, please provide the links to our social media so that participants could share their experience on our Twitter and our Facebook and all other ways. So it is my pleasure and honor to introduce Professor Ebba Arsenielsson. She's from Sweden. And you know, all these days, we've been collaborating for a long time. And during this week, I was in contact with Ebba, and I was visiting her Facebook page. And almost every day, Ebba is presenting a keynote speaker at different conferences. It's just amazing. So Nellie, would you like to add something, anything? Only unmute your mic. Unmute your mic, Nellie.
I would like to add that Dr. Osha Nilsson is an amazing speaker and human being, and I think that's one of the key things about her. She's been presenting with in my online conferences, free conferences, since 2009. Every single year, and sometimes she registers a year in advance. And I think this is what we are as educators. We are caring individuals who do our best to spread the word about humanity and how we can help one another. And learning together and collaborating is one way of doing it. Giving forward to others. And I think Professor Ebba is an example of such a person with her amazing attitude to others, giving, and the open education resources. Everything that she does comes from the heart. So it really does give me great pleasure to be here with Professor Ebba and everyone else. So thank you, everyone, for making this happen.
Yeah. So it is my pleasure and honor to give the floor to Professor Ebba Arsenielsson.
Thank you so much for, first of all, for the kind invitation to this very promising conference over the 3 days. It's amazing that you have made it, and it's amazing of the program you have put together. And as I heard from there are people from 22 countries. It's really fantastic. And thanks a lot for your very kind invitation also to letting me be here together with you. And as both Ludmila Smirnova and Nellie Deutsch has said, we have known each other for several years by now. And it is always a great pleasure to collaborate with you and to contribute and to learn together, because I have learned so much together with you. And as especially Nellie knows, my motto is caring is sharing and sharing is caring. And I started my presentation with that, but I always end my presentation with that as well, because that is really, really important. So thank you so much. I will see if I can then share my screen.
Yeah, so you have co-hosting rights, you should.
Yes, I got that now, thank you. I also have a video, so I think I should tick the box share sound. Is that right?
Yes.
I think
Share
so.
Sound. Mhm.
It says I need to have some password.
It's your password, I think. It should be to your yeah, okay.
Can you see my screen by now?
Yes.
And can you hear me well as also?
Yes.
Yes, fantastic. So I am greeting you from Sweden, and I think the common word to greet each other nowadays is good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, or whatever it is. For me, it is 9 o'clock in the evening, so I will say good evening, but I know that you are more or less in the middle of the day, most of you maybe. So I entitled my presentation, Social Emotional Learning and Seamless Learning for the Futures. And I have the futures in plural because it's important, because there's not just one future which fits all. There are many futures. If you wonder why I had a presentation of myself, it's because I always put my slides in SlideShare, and sometimes I felt it good to have it. When you look at others' presentations, it's good to see who is the person behind it. So for today, I would like to touch upon some of those themes about the SDGs from United Nations, the futures of education by UNESCO. Of course, about the pandemic and the post-pandemic, open education, seamless learning, social-emotional learning and empathy, trends in learning and trends in workplace learning. And I will also say something about micro-learning and micro-credentials. Of course, that belongs to workplace learning as well. And also about reimagine our future together. And I think together, and as was said also previously, collaboration is really the word. So it was maybe that should have come up in the word cloud, I think, as well. Otherwise, I think all of the most important words were presented in the word cloud. So those are the themes I would like to try to touch upon. We have to remember that even before the pandemic, there were a lot of initiatives going on, not at least the one from UNESCO and the United Nations. And that was already in 2015, 2016, because it was clear that there was something wrong with our educational system. So I will argue that, of course, we saw and we felt and we were part of a lot of really, really hard suffering during the pandemic. But and of course, it was terrible, and it was so many people suffered and dying, and societies were so much suffering. But there were many of those problems were well known even before. So that was why many global organizations and even national organizations were trying with a lot of initiatives to try to come out of some kind of other kind of approach, not at least for education. And as we know, we have the SDG 4, directly dedicated to education, because it also has an impact at all the others, to achieve the others, either direct or indirect, or they can enhance the others. We also know that already in 2019, the OER recommendation was adopted by all member countries in UNESCO for opening up education to the world, because that is needed to reach the SDG 4. Quality education for all. That is the only way which is possible with opening up education and with the use and reuse and adaptation of open educational resources. Because otherwise, we have to build one university a day around the globe to reach out to all those billions of people living at our planet. And that is not possible. That is neither desirable. So the pandemic showed us the missing, some kind of the missing gaps and what have to be done. And maybe also it had urged to do something about it, because earlier on it were maybe more like desires, but now we really saw, all of us. And I'm working so much internationally, so I see and hear every day. And as Ludmilla was saying as well, I used to talk with people from all over the world every day, and I used to have keynotes all over the places more or less every day, at least once a week. So I meet a lot of people, and I do also a lot of research in this field. So we can really say we have some kind of global understanding about what are the lacking and missing points in our educational system. And the pandemic has shown us so obviously what that is. So it is our responsibility to try to solve it and to find solutions. Now I will show you a short video. We will see if it will work. It is from The Futures of Education by UNESCO. It is nearly 2 minutes. We will see. Please let me know if you can hear it.
What kinds of futures do we want to shape? Accelerated climate change.
It's okay?
Artificial intelligence and biotechnology.
Yes.
Good.
Increasing exclusion and fragmentation. Our world is becoming more complex and uncertain with many disruptive challenges. Knowledge and learning are humanity's greatest renewable resources for responding to challenges and inventing alternatives. Yet, education doesn't only respond to a changing world. Education transforms the world. But to create the futures we want, we must rethink education. UNESCO has launched a global initiative to reimagine how knowledge and learning can shape the future of humanity and the planet. We are looking at 2050 and beyond, and we want to partner with you to discuss, debate, and re-envision the ways education enables us to become what we want to become. For ourselves, for each other. Thinking together so we can act together. Join the conversation and let's make the futures we want.
So let's make the future we want. And as it was shown in the video, we need to do something about our educational system. And this was already launched before the pandemic in 2019 when this initiative was launched. And as you heard, I take another perspective. In the educational system, we are so used to we offer courses, we offer degrees, we offer a lot of things, we offer the research, we offer whatever it is. But is it really needed out there in the society? This initiative take another perspective about the people, about the societies and the individuals learning to become what they want to become, which they not yet have become. So how can the educational institution live up to that? And I think, and I will argue that due to the pandemic, this has been so obvious that we need to change perspective towards the learners so they can orchestrate their own learning. And also to be part of, not just to be part of it, but to take control over their own learning pathways. So the vision of this system is that knowledge and learning are humanity's greatest renewable resources for responding to challenges and inventing alternatives. And yet education does more than respond to a changing world. Education transforms the world. And that is also related to the pandemic, because the whole planet has suffered. So how can we transform the whole planet to be something we want to be part in, and also for our children to be part in? education is one of the key pieces of the 2030 agenda. We all know that. And this initiative is built on the 2030 agenda. But it also went a bit forwards up till 2050 and beyond. Of course, that seemed to be quite far ahead, but maybe not. To reach there, we have to start maybe yesterday, at least. So a lot of things was already ongoing before the pandemic, because there were needs to change the system. And to the COVID and to the pandemic and all the people who have suffered around the globe, it has been so visible and so obvious and so clear that education is not just about degrees, content, exams, etc. It is about well-being, it is about social context, it is about food. Some people during the pandemic, for example, they didn't even get a meal for a day because the school was the place where children got the meals. So that was also a real problem. So education is so much more than the content and the buildings, because education and learning take place all over the places. And that is also why we need to see formal and informal and informal learning more merged together. And that was one reason why I chose the topic of seamless education and seamless learning, because it is have to be brought together. I think it is now then important to have this map in front of you to really understand how it looked like. And just in the news today, in my country, many countries, the COVID-19 has decreased in most of the countries, and some countries are going to lock down again. For example, my neighbor countries in Norway and Denmark and Germany and Austria, they are really suffering for the moment. So we can't say going back to the normal, because the normal we knew back in 2020 doesn't exist any longer. And I'm not sure either we want to go back to that, but because, as I said, so many of the problems in the school system and education system was there before, but we were ignoring it because we were so used to it. So because we have lived in it with, 100 years or something. So of course, the COVID-19 has resulted in some kind of paradigm shift on how learners of all ages worldwide can access learning. And that is not just in the school buildings or by the books or from the teacher. So it is more than ever essential that we have a global community and collaborate together to foster universal access to knowledge and to quality knowledge. So already in the very beginning, UNESCO started a lot of initiatives. For example, they had this call about supporting learning and knowledge, sharing through open educational resources. They also had a lot of another initiatives, and some of those are here. For example, how to build crisis-resilient learning system. Resilience was one of the words in the word cloud in the beginning of this conference. For example, about exploring sustainable open education resources, business models. To go further on than the textbook, to really implement and internalize the OER recommendations, five areas. So it goes beyond the textbooks. And also about guidance on how to use open educational practice and culture during the COVID and pandemic. And also about that COVID-19 was a catalyst for greater use worldwide, both with OER, but also with MOOCs. All the larger book providers, for example, they really increased their numbers, both in learners, but also in courses and contributions from universities and other stakeholders. Also, the OECD did a lot during the pandemic, and they put a lot of resources and research together and about how to build a resilient recovery, because that is really important. And that is also why we can't go back to the normal, because it doesn't exist. It is about building a resilience recovery, because there will come, this was a crisis worldwide, but there will come other crises. There will be floods, there will be fires, there will be earthquakes, there will be maybe other kind of diseases, whatever. So they made a lot of research from OECD, and they put forward this research report about lessons learned from on education from COVID-19 worldwide, and some of their lessons were about learning is a relational and a social process, and maybe this is the most important shift. As I was also touching upon before, it is so much more than exams, content, degrees, or whatever. It is a social process. And education systems are not too heavy to move. We saw that we could move more or less over a night worldwide back in March 2020. So why can't we continue to move? But we have to remember it is very big difference with this urgent remote distance education than well-planned qualified distance education. Although maybe some say that the children were suffering and distance education is not good enough, etc., etc. Maybe that is true. But that is not. That is because many teachers were forced to do it, and what they did was more or less just to put the content to the computer, and with the Zoom or whatever kind of system they had, and that is not qualified open distance education. OECD further go on with those 3 lessons. Education actors should nurture resilient mindsets that value people and processes over classrooms and devices. Again, it is about people. Number 2, educators need new skills and new knowledge to capitalize on new education priorities. And lesson 3, addressing learning gaps now will minimize disruption in students' educational journeys. So if we really are serious about the lessons we have to learn, it's about to try to not make further disruptions in students' educational journeys and how they can orchestrate their own learning. And that is also why we need to take the learner's perspective, so they can become what they want to become. And for example, for number 2 here, many educators were not prepared going online. So that was maybe why it was failing quite a lot in the beginning. I mean, they did their best. They did their very, very best. It was not an easy situation. And the institution and the leaders and the infrastructure and the whole ecosystem were not prepared. And it was also clearly showed that the institutions who were rather well prepared with the infrastructure and had an ecosystem and had resources in place and had teachers with competence and had a strong leadership with both power, but also about encouragement and about who were brave enough to do something with courage. They succeeded much to a larger extent than maybe those who didn't have that. So there are new competences required. I will talk about some global studies from the pandemic. I have myself been involved in those 2. And one was immediately initiated by some researchers, and we were some 60 researchers from 31 countries, and the countries are here on the map. So we reached 62.7% of the whole world population, and that was not that bad. And we did it in 1 month, and we did it online. And most of us didn't know each other before. So even this research process and the methodology show that the importance of collaboration and that we together could do something due to, of course, the disaster with the pandemic, but also due to the technology and online possibilities we have. So the purpose was how to better understand this uncertainty and navigate through it. And some of the findings, which have also been described earlier on by my previous speakers, is that it wasn't so much about the content and the exams and those kind of things. It was about psychological press. It was about emerging educational roles of the parents and schools. And many schools were maybe not so used to work so close to the parents. And the parents were absolutely not so used to take the role of an educator for the children. So there were no new roles for all. And to support communities and mechanisms were very important, and sometimes that suffered, of course. There were issues about pedagogy of care and trauma-informed pedagogy. It was about surveillance, ethics, and data privacy concerns. Of course, the digital divide was very obvious from those who were very well equipped, but they were also part of the world where maybe they just have, one mobile for a family with parents and some uncles and aunts and some 7 to 8 children and living in a flat. And maybe the parents were unemployed and everything had to go on in this flat with maybe just one mobile and maybe no connectivity. So it was not easy, of course. So the digital divide became very, very obvious. It was also shown very clear that the essential skills or the social competences and skills, which we sometimes call the soft skills as well, and the digital competences were very important. Of course, it was clear that inequality, and social justice were shown worldwide as very strong remarks. And it was also shown the matter of openness and open education. People were sharing, and the culture of sharing were very, very strong. And it just also more or less happened overnight because we had to help each other and we had to come out and do the best of the situation. So in summary, there were some social issues. There were some pedagogical challenges. It was about harnessing technology for teaching and learning, and there were a lot of psychological dimensions. And as you see, worldwide, it is so much more than content and lessons and books and this kind of things. So maybe a final thought about from this research is, as well as creating problems in the educational landscape peculiar to COVID-19, the pandemic in fact exposed and surfaced already existing problems. And that was also what I stressed from the beginning. So we can't blame the COVID for all these kind of things. It was already existing. Another study, also a global study. Here we were 13 researchers, also globally, and we tried to map both open education but also open science and the practices and uses of that. And we came more or less to the same kind of findings as the previous one. So in a summary from those studies and also other studies which have been carried out during the pandemic, there is a lot, that's really a lot out there. It is very much about collaboration, about openness. And then we have to go back to what is openness about. It is about open as to people, open as to places, open as to methods, but maybe more important is open also to ideas, because there was a lot of experimentation in sometimes bad, but sometimes very good, because people needed to innovate. I know that you can't see on the screen here about the open principles, but I will just say that also already before the pandemic, the issue of open education has been very much put forward, and Here in Europe, we have a research center for the European Commission, and they have come up with a framework about open education, and that then encompasses 10 dimensions. That is about strategy, it is about leadership, technology, it is about quality, of course, and those are the transversal pillars. And then there are the core pillars, which is about pedagogy, content, recognition, those kind of things. And what it shows is very much that there is an ecosystem. And those of us who are working with open education, we know why open is important. And the most important, I will argue it, because education is a human right, and it is about social justice for everyone. And that goes back already in 1948. So that is not anything new either, but we need to remember it, and we need to work forward with it. So to provide qualified education for all, it is important to work with open education, because that is, as I said before, the only way to reach everyone, because the education system is very, very exclusive as it is, because it is just for the elites who can enter the universities, and in many countries they have to pay very high fees, and also a lot of money for the books, and sometimes also money for the exams. So, as you may have noticed, I have focused this session more about the issues from the learner side, from the individual side, and from the social emotional side. Not so much about content and exams and those kind of things, because I think it's very important to argue and stress about the social emotional dimensions of learning, because we already know, and also know, it was also presented before about Dewey, that when we are motivated, then we can learn. If we're not motivated, then we can't learn. And when we are in anger, when we are in fear, then we can't learn. So the social emotional learning aspects are very, very important. So what does it mean, really? It used to be said that it applied to the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationship, and make responsible decisions. So how do we really apply that in our education today, in our curricula, for example? Maybe you do. I don't see that very often, because it takes for granted. This definition is coming from Casal. So what is it really about? It is about relationship, how to build healthy relationships, and how to build meaningful relationships with a variety of individuals from varying backgrounds. Quite often in schools, they are coming maybe from the same kind of district or the same kind of areas and the same kind of background, rich or poor or whatever, but not very diverse. So to learn to know yourself, you also have to learn about diversity. It is about self-management. And that is also very much about how to orchestrate your own learning. It is about self-awareness, to understand personal emotions and thoughts and how they lead to particular behaviors. It is about social awareness, to see a situation from different kind of perspectives, maybe not just my own perspective, but also the perspective of others, from my peers, my friends. That is also very much about diversity. Because you know all this kind of thing, but in schools, how often are we really taking this seriously and discussing it? It is quite often that you are in a class and with the same kind of background and more or less with the same kind of thoughts, and you're not exposed to others, which you maybe were now in the COVID-19, because everyone was at home. It is very much about responsible decision making and to make healthy decisions, and also to make social actions based on ethics, safety, and social norms. Again, how do we really address this in the curricula today in the schools? And how do we really do we even address this in our exams? In my opinion, I think many exams are mainly about content and the subject, facts and figures, this kind of things. But in real life, the social emotional learning is the most important, because you need to live in a society together with others to make the healthy decisions and to be part of a community, to be part of democracy, to shape human rights and social justice and equity. Sometimes I think it is good to go back to the roots. And one of the pioneers in our field about open education is Wedemeyer. And he used to say that the openness have different kind of dimensions. It is about open access. It is about open participation. It is about open accreditation, open admission, and openness in practice. And maybe some of you have read this wonderful book, Learning at the Back Door. How this little guy was just, looking through the door where all the privileged white people were sitting in the classroom, and this little guy was standing in the just looking through the door, learning what they were saying in the classroom, but he didn't have access to the classroom. So I think we need to go back to the roots and see what they can learn us and how that can be applied today. And another one is Börje Holmberg. He's a Swede, by the way. He already developed also the empathic approach in theory and practice in the 1989. And he emphasized the interactions and conversation and the atmospheres and feelings and trust that are essential for learning, not at least distance learning. And also that we really need to examine and be serious about the students' willingness to learn. And that means that personal contact is essential. So, for example, in the beginning of the COVID, when more or less everything was going on Zoom, how was the personal contact in the beginning? Well, we just saw each other in some kind of window, and some didn't even have their camera on, or for different reasons. Maybe they didn't want it. Maybe they didn't have connections enough. I mean, there were sure for different reasons, but the personal contact is essential for learning. And he also very much emphasized the lifelong and lifelong learning and learning throughout the lifespan. And that means that lifelong learning doesn't begin when you are 20. It began when you are born. And that is also important to stress, because sometimes we think about lifelong learning that, for example, when you're in maybe 50s, you're going back to the university, doing some kind of course or degree, whatever. But lifelong learning is throughout the lifespan, and that is also why we need to merge formal and informal and informal learning much more. So then we come to seamless learning, because that is exactly what that is about. How connecting learning experiences and learning activities can take place. And this is just one model. It used to be said that it is seamless learning is both about pedagogy, about the context, and about the content, of course. And it's usually done with different kind of advices. Mainly, it is also sometimes called actually mobile learning, or it's also called outdoor learning, because it is learning takes place in different kind of contexts. And of course, that was really what also happened during the pandemic. Although the learning didn't take place in schools, but it took place in other places, either in the homes or on the streets or wherever people could be. So it's often made of, it's also used technology supported scenarios. It's also experience to various contexts, again about formal, informal, and non-formal, and thereby support improving and enhancing learning processes, and continuity of learning across environments and settings. I think we have heard, many of us in our countries, that if we are going back both to schools or to working places, those buildings need to be shaped in different kind of ways, because learning with the content can take place in other ways. So there must be a reason for coming to the working place. There must be a reason why coming to the classroom. It's not just to listen to the lessons or during the exam. There not need to be a reason, and the reason is mainly of social, emotional character. So, so seamless learning is very much that the classroom never ends. Just to say some example, seamless learning is about across times, across locations. It is about ubiquitous access to learning resources, encompassing physical and digital worlds, combining use of multiple devices, and also about personal and social learning. So actually, it encompasses and embed everything what we are talking about, what need to be changed. Also, before the pandemic, the Open University in UK, they always annually publish this kind of reports about innovating pedagogy, and this was 2021. So previous year they came up with a lot of new items and innovation about technology, but the last couple of years they have had other kind of themes. For example, for this year about best learning moments, because we really can learn best when we are motivated, when we are in a good mood, when we are healthy, when we really want to learn. And they also have this gratitude as a pedagogy. And then, of course, chat booths and other things. But also what is important is about student co-creating teaching and learning. I will argue that we need to stop to talk about we and them. We need to talk about us. We can do this together, and learners need to be collaborators, co-creators. And not at least working so much with the digital things and technology. Sometimes the learners are maybe more equipped and maybe have more knowledge than maybe the teachers. So those are just some of the themes, but I really like the gratitude as a pedagogy, because that goes again back to empathy, well-being, social, emotional dimensions, and also about the best learning moments. How can we really facilitate the best learning moments? EDUCAUSE also use these annual reports about trends in higher education. So for this year, they have social, technology, economic, environmental, and political. And what I think, though, this both reports show very well is that we need to take the ecosystem and see that there are different kind of dimensions, and they need to be embedded and integrated within each other. For the working place, some trends is about there are needs for reframing soft skills, or rather social skills. I think both you and me, we see quite often when we see advertisements, which is not so often anymore for a job, because most of the jobs are taken by, are given by networks or peers. But in case there are advertisements, of course, it's good to be a teacher or a nurse or whatever, or an engineer. But what they're really asking for is about those social competences, like problem solving, like collaboration, like innovation, like communication, like working together. I think you remember the list. So in this report, they stress about power skills, and that is leadership, communication, productivity, personal development, and wellness. And about the technical skills, it's more like marketing, like financing, etc. And then the technical skills is about all the technical skills we have for not at least for the digital transformation, what that will bring to working places. You can't talk about learning and education and working places without talking about microlearning, because I think that is coming more and more, to have small pieces of learning just for me and just in time learning, not to have those enormous courses lasting for, one semester or whatever, or several weeks. And especially in working places, because motivation is so important, just for me and just in time learning. But maybe you can build on, to collect a lot of different kind of small modules, and then there can be some kind of larger model from that. And I think that will also be a change due to the pandemic, because people get bored so quick. And earlier on, we didn't recognize that so much because we were used to it. It was quite tiring to sit in a classroom for several hours. But with microlearning, you can really keep the motivation and the energy very high. And then when it comes to micro credentials, that with those micro module learning, you can build your own credentials. And that is also, again, we need to go away from the content, the assessment, the degree, etc., because there are so many other ways, and also that the working place, to be an active citizen in the society, there are needs for other kind of skills. So I will come back to the futures of education, which you started with. They had a consultation already in 2019, and you could organizations, individuals, and companies or institutions or whatever, they were called for public consultations. They could take part in maybe running a workshop. We did that, for example, with ICD, the organization I'm working for, but also for my Swedish Association for Distance Education here in my country. We did that at one of our conferences, and you could write a blog post, you could answer a survey, and they got those responses. Plus 400 focus groups were discussing. 6,300 participants from all countries. 3,200 were written submissions. 85,000 responded in this survey. 7,500 participated in events and webinars. Quite an enormous population. Wednesday, the 10th of November, the report was launched. I don't know, maybe some of you participated in the launch, I don't know. But they have now have this report from all those consultations, and they have worked for 2 years by now with all those kind of people from all over the world, and a lot of reports and a lot of consultations in different kind of languages. I don't have not the exact figures about it, but they have come up with this report, Reimagine a new social, reimagine our futures together. Our futures, a new social contract for education. I think this is really, really promising. So what you need to know about UNESCO's Futures of Education report, here are the chapters. It is about towards more equitable educational futures. It is about disruptions and emerging transformations. It is about the pedagogies of cooperation and solidarity, about curricula and the evolving knowledge commons, the transformative work of teachers, and the safeguarding and transforming schools, education across different times and spaces. And remember, this was started before the pandemic, and then most of the work was done during the pandemic. And I think their conclusions are really, really important. And I think that will form our new, although I hate to say the word normal nowadays, but the new normal. So by that, I will show you a short video again.
The futures of humanity and our living planet are at risk. We are at a turning point. Urgent action is needed to change course and transform the future. Everyone alive today has a tremendous obligation to future generations to ensure that their world is one of human rights, abundance, and not scarcity. Education is one of the key ways we address inequality, exclusion, and work on healing our damaged planet. But to transform the world, education needs to be transformed. UNESCO launched its Futures of Education initiative to bring the world together to reimagine how education can shape the future. Despite the urgency of action and in conditions of great uncertainty, we have reason to be full of hope. Education can help us make a peaceful, just, and sustainable world. For this, we need to renew education by asking, what that we do now should be continued, what should be abandoned, and what needs to be invented afresh. A new social contract for education needs to be built. Collectively, we must strengthen education as a global common good. Let's all work together in our communities and across the world to ensure that education best supports our shared futures.
So the core pillars in this report is about what are really the content we have in our education curricula and system today. Is it really relevant? They argue that everything in education need to be related to the challenges we are facing globally. And that means also that tools, pedagogy, and procedures and processes need to be redefined, retransformed, or whatever. And also, what are really the values we built our education system on? So that is also why I will argue we can't go back to the normal, because that normal was built on other kind of values, other kind of relevance, etc. We need to build for the future. In this initiative, one can also be involved in different ways. You can act and you can have surveys that you can have workshops, focus groups, or whatever. If you would like to learn more about it, there's a lot of information on the webpage. So the way forward is about we need to build relationships with each other, with the planet, and with the technology. And that lays out the vision for learning and knowledge to design to help and achieve this. And one of the keywords is about collaboration, and that they were stressed that very, very much. So with that, I will end, and I will thank you so much for the opportunity to share this with you.
Thank you so much. I learned a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Very insightful, enlightening, and inspiring. And what the major topic and the major message is about us doing it together, being this together, co-create, collaborate. And that's what we started doing. And that's what this conference is about. We are co-creating this new learning, new environment. So this is the first day. Thank you very much, Eva. Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity, and that is, and congratulations again for organizing this conference, because as you're saying, that is really what this conference is about, learning to get together and to make the journey together.
Yeah. Questions from our audience. Questions.
If there's no questions, In the chat, I'm going to put in our website so you can all check out the program and see the schedule of presenters. Tomorrow, we will be starting at 9 a.m. and going to 4:30, and that's Eastern Standard Time. For those of you who are seeking credit for CTLE or KDP, the sign-in sheet is now in the chat for you. And we will be posting the sign-in sheets at the end of the event, so you just have to stay tuned for those each day. And remember to post about it. Join our Facebook group, hashtag PPC21. Let's share our thoughts and we can collaborate together.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank
And
you.
see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock.
Bright
Thank
and
you.
early. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.